Okay, if I am, my name is Josh Kirstenlauer, and today we will go with James Brommer's presentation. So,
Hello, my Masonic brethren and guests. I'm Jim Brommer. I'm a past high priest of Perkins, Royal Arch Chapter number 209. And today I would like to discuss with you a little bit about how Samuel Perkins Chapter got its name. In 1860, Mechanicsburg was in the midst of a 20-year growth spurt, experiencing a steadily increasing population. There were 882 residents in 1850, 1,939 in 1860, and over 2,500 by 1870. And during this time, in 1866, the Royal Arch Masons in the Mechanicsburg area took action to form a new chapter in their community. 100 years later, in 1967, I became an exalted Royal Arch Mason in this Mechanicsburg chapter. And I was curious why those Royal Arch Masons selected that name instead of one more universally recognized, such as King Solomon or King David, or perhaps after George Washington or Benjamin Franklin. Or why didn't we just name ourselves Eureka Royal Arch Chapter? The Royal Arch, as a Masonic organization, can, as in so many matters related to our fraternity, including how they are named, seem mysterious. Though some information I gained several years after becoming a member of the Mechanicsburg chapter, I still could not figure out how we got the name Samuel Perkins. So I asked some of the senior members of the chapter, and they said, oh, it's named after a man who was active in the Grand Royal Arch at that time. Well, that satisfied me. I did not want to go any further on it. Then a man named Wayne Huss wrote a book, 3 volumes, The Master Builders. It was published by Grand Lodge, and the 3rd volume of this is a biography of the Grand Masters. And I looked into this, thinking, well, I'll see what's here. And sure enough, there are 2 Perkins. There are 2 Samuel Perkins at that. One was Samuel Huntington Perkins, and the other Samuel Clark Perkins. And each of them served as Grand High Priest, and each as Grand Lodge Grand Master. The older Perkins was Grand High Priest 1831 to 1833. The younger Perkins led the Holy Royal Arch 1866 to 1867. And he was Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania 1872 to 1873. Well, the senior members were correct. He certainly was active in the Grand Royal Arch in 1866. The tie-in of Perkins to Mechanicsburg becomes even more significant based upon a review of some of the minutes of the Grand Holy Royal Arch Chapter of Pennsylvania. An entry for July 12, 1866 records that a special meeting was held in Mechanicsburg on that date for the purpose of constituting Royal Arch Chapter number 209, and the presiding officer was none other than the most excellent Grand High Priest, Samuel C. Perkins. Additionally, while looking into the younger Perkins's biography, I noted that he served in the Civil War. At the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, Samuel C. Perkins enlisted as a private in Company A, 1st Regiment Artillery, Philadelphia Home Guards, and was soon 1st Sergeant. Next, he became 1st Lieutenant of the battery, or as Joshua Gerstenlauer would say, a red leg. He served in that capacity, and they became alerted during 1862 in September during Lee's invasion of Maryland, which climaxed at the Battle of Antietam. But then again, in 1863, when Lee was coming north toward Harrisburg. This was an unexpected revelation that tied directly into my ongoing interest in the 1863 Confederate invasion of Mechanicsburg and the West Shore in general. And I found, yes, there was a Philadelphia artillery battery ordered to the area for the defense of Harrisburg against the invading Confederates. It turns out that this was the Landis Battery, which, following the common practice of that day, was named after its captain, Henry D. Landis, and that the 1st Lieutenant of that battery was Samuel C. Perkins. I've been researching the Masonic connections of Mechanicsburg, and I've been researching the history of the Confederate invasion of this general area. At that time, it still didn't dawn on me, I'm talking about the same man. But eventually, it did. And this artillery battery left Philadelphia for our state capital on 24 June. Coincidentally, at that time, Perkins was also Grand Scribe of the Holy Royal Arch of Pennsylvania. This was also when General Robert E. Lee and his army were proceeding north for an invasion. They left Philadelphia in the evening on the 24th of June by railroad and arrived in Harrisburg a few hours later. To summarize, on a straight line basis, Mechanicsburg is roughly midway between the 15 miles that separate Harrisburg and Carlisle. Sporting Hill is about 3 miles northeast of Mechanicsburg. Also, Mechanicsburg is about 85 miles north of Washington, D.C., and 29 miles north of Gettysburg. After spending that night in the train station, the next morning the artillery marched to Fort Washington on the Susquehanna River's west shore, opposite Harrisburg. They apparently lacked hands-on experience, though, with their equipment, which became apparent when the men took apart the harness for the artillery battery and they couldn't put it back together. So somebody realized there was a regular artilleryman, Lieutenant Rufus King, as a staff officer somewhere among the many West Shore defenders. He came there and showed them how to put the harness back together, and also taught them a few other military skills. We can learn some more of the integrity of Perkins from this example of action he took while on active duty. In the midst of all the excitement and stress of an impending assault by elements of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, Perkins remembered on June 28th that it was Sunday, the Lord's Day. This was documented in a diary by another member of his battery and said, "Perkins is a remarkable fine officer and one unusually respected by the men." He added that the service was impressive and will not soon be forgotten by those who participated in it. 2 days later, on June 30th, in advance of some Union infantrymen from the Camp Hill, today's Camp Hill area, ventured out to the west and got pinned down in the vicinity of Sporting Hill. It was particularly hard to counter the Confederate fire because it was in a thick-walled barn that afforded the invaders a fort-like protection. So they called for a bigger gun. And the artillery element, Landis's battery, sent one group forward, and it was in charge of First Lieutenant Perkins. Also, coincidentally, Lieutenant Rufus King went along out with them. Eureka! This established that besides being named for Samuel C. Perkins, the man who headed the Grand Royal Arch in Pennsylvania in 1866, he was also here in 1863 at Sporting Hill. One of the commentators on the 100th anniversary, or 150th anniversary, of the Battle of Sporting Hill commented that the high tide of the Civil War may have been at Gettysburg, but that it splashed, and that splash partially landed at Sporting Hill. So here we are, I think it's a great analogy, here we are with our man Perkins, right there on top of Sporting Hill. And they got ready to fire a projectile over toward that fort-like barn. Lieutenant King noticed something's amiss in their loading sequence. Ordering a halt in the procedure, King pointed out to the Philadelphians that they were about to fire their first round backwards. After they initiated appropriate corrective action, the artillerists took aim, and believe it or not, their first shot hit the structure. Then, after an exchange of some additional fire, the forces around Sporting Hill heard the sound of cannon fire southwest in the direction of the borough of Mechanicsburg. This was some Confederates that were at the railroad crossing on Trindle Road. Nevertheless, it caused the Yankees at Sporting Hill to become nervous and wary of a flank attack. Meantime, to the Southerners at Mechanicsburg, upon hearing of shooting at Sporting Hill, they feared they'd be cut off and retreated. So, after firing a few more shots, Perkins and his men decided to return back to the Oysters Point area. Oysters Point, there's a plaque there today, you can see it. It's in the general vicinity of 32nd and Market in Camp Hill. Now, we realize this was also when General Jenkins' men and General Jenkins were told they had to head toward Gettysburg. And he'd be doing a rear guard action, so Couch's men, General Couch's forces, did not follow too closely. General Couch was the overall Union commander in charge of the defense of Harrisburg. The next morning, July 1st, Landis and his battery traveled within 2 miles to the south of Mechanicsburg. As they followed, 2 miles to the north of Mechanicsburg, as they followed the turnpike to Carlisle, where they stayed for 3 days. Then on July 4th and 5th, they went to the Mount Holly and Pine Grove Furnace areas. They continued following after the Battle of Gettysburg, and when General Meade was pursuing the Army in Northern Virginia. On July 28th, the Philadelphians were relieved and returned back to Philadelphia on the morning of July 29th. And they mustered out of service the next day, and this ended Lieutenant Perkins' military career. But Perkins was involved, I want to digress a minute, in other things. He was also involved in civic activities in Philadelphia, and he was very involved in the Presbyterian Church and the Yale Alumni Association. So, it is not clear that the senior companions were indeed clear when they said to me that Mechanicsburg Royal Arch chapter is named after a man who was at its time active in the Grand Chapter of Pennsylvania. But this turns out to be only one of Brother Perkins' connections to Mechanicsburg, since the Philadelphian had an important earlier physical presence as well. As first lieutenant of the Landis Battery, Perkins patriotically responded to our nation's call to defend against its invasion of the North. And we know that he was a religious man. He was active in the affairs of the Presbyterian Church, and he led divine services on Sunday, June 28th. Finally, the following question needs to be considered. In 1866, did some of the founders of Royal Arch Chapter 209 know that in 1863 Perkins was active in the defense of Harrisburg's West Shore in general, and that of Mechanicsburg at Sporting Hill in particular? Perhaps some of them had visited or observed Perkins firsthand while on active duty with the Landis Battery. If this were true, seeing Perkins in action would have left a deep, permanent, and favorable impression with them. And those deeds would still be fresh in their minds 3 years later when they were deciding upon a name for Perkins' chapter. Then, too, our forebears may have also learned of the local military exploits of Perkins through contemporary and Royal Arch functions of the day, as they became aware of the participation Perkins had in the defense of Harrisburg. Because there were grand communications, of course, then that would have been in 1863, 64, and 65, particularly the 1864 and 5. On the other hand, possibly in 1866, the Mechanicsburg Royal Arch Masons might not only have known of Perkins through his Royal Arch offices, but also of his general Masonic activities. If that is the case, with what is evident today in his defense of Sporting Hill during the Civil War, our chapter, taking on the name of Brother Perkins, was even better than was realized when it was named in 1866. Therefore, regardless of the rationale, the Mechanicsburg Royal Arch Chapter founders followed when they decided to adopt the name of Brother Perkins in obviously that showed their choice for two solid reasons. Today, one realizes that the Mechanicsburg chapter carries the name not only of the 1866 Grand High Priest of Pennsylvania, Samuel C. Perkins, but equally important that this chapter is also named after First Lieutenant Samuel C. Perkins, a patriot and God-fearing man who took an active part in the defense of the greater Mechanicsburg area during the Confederate invasion of 1863. Accordingly, the Freemasons of Mechanicsburg get great pride in knowing that their local Royal Arch chapter is named after so noble a man as Brother Samuel C. Perkins. Thank you for your attention during this presentation.